Fort Lauderdale. And as it neared and passed by their camp, it was going around 65 miles an hour. And so Spider looked to my dad and said, "I'll jump if you jump." And my father, who was around 47 years of age at the time, said, "I'm not that stupid." But the two of them ended up not jumping off of the train and ended up riding it from there to Fort Lauderdale, being found in the middle of the night by the conductors who, rather than stopping and kicking them off the train or reporting them to the authorities, chose to feed them, let them sleep in the cabin, and sent them back on the next train in the morning. I tell you all of that because I feel like it's important to understand intuitively the different tones that come from something like that, and that the way that my father told the story to me when I was much younger, it always seemed like an adventure and not really like taking into account at the time what it meant to be homeless or an alcoholic. And it's interesting to me that he chose to kind of glorify it, whether or not he knew he was doing that, by making light of it and making it into a humorous situation. And I think that there's a lot of impact in how things are introduced to us, and how we mine the details from there. So a lot of what I do is taking things sort of like that story, and on a personal level, I reflect on, for me, as a child, it was a funny story about my father being taken, or being homeless, but it was about the adventure of hopping a train, in the evening and not knowing where it was going. And I think that plays a lot into how he was raised, as sort of this like wild, to see things in sort of this Wild West light, you know. And I think that merging that into my own identity gives me a better way of understanding him as a whole person. So to get to creative induction from that, I think it matters in what light we tell stories to ourselves and what way we remember. Because if I had started by telling you that my father was an alcoholic and an abuser, it would change the light under which you saw him before I told you that story. And it's complicated because seeing both the good and the bad in him has sort of helped me get a better grasp on this idea of wholeness for the self, because you are really a conglomeration of all of your past moments. So to tie that to creative induction, I'd like to talk a little bit about what brought me to deciding on this topic for speaking with you guys today. When Elizabeth asked me to speak to you guys, I wasn't really sure what I would say or what I would talk about, but as I was thinking about it, I had this sort of ghost sound in my head of Indigenous, and I didn't really have a reference point for Native American flutes. I don't really specifically listen to a ton of music with, but I chose to do so because it seemed like a good reference point to mine into my own ideas from. And during that, as I took that and found some flute music to listen to, I was walking and I came to this idea of creative induction as this practice of going inside yourself and looking at your experiences and how your sensations and your perceptions feed your creativity, and how we on this sort of practice to help bring it in a more natural and fluid way on a daily basis. And for me, I started thinking about the other ways that I already do this for myself. And since my background is more in writing and philosophy, I try to use the practice of letting my mind float, and I'll pick a phrase, um, and we'll usually shift through a few of them until I come to one almost through meditation on the idea of just finding the right thing to say, the right thing that will extirpate the feeling that I need to get out. And then I'm establish a practice of taking that feeling, that phrase, that idea, and putting it down on the page. I usually give myself 10 or 15 minutes to do something like that. And I think that this sort of practice has helped me a lot in terms of just having a daily creative practice for myself. I think that it could influence other people in a really productive way, um, based on whichever medium it is you work best in. Um, so I feel like there's a passive way and an active way to do it. I feel like the passive way would be the way that I came upon the flute sounds in my head, where I didn't really have a reference point for them. But by recognizing that it was something in my head that was out of the ordinary and leaning into it, trusting that something good could be mined out of it and following through with that, I was able to find something that I thought was meaningful and worthwhile to share. Um, and then I think the more active way is to literally set yourself in place and try to seek out those sort of active, intuitive feelings, around your creativity. So I'd like to sort of engage you guys in discussion about these things. Um, so I don't know if we could unmute people.
You guys are allowed to unmute yourself, by the way.
Sorry, I'm confused. What are you asking?
So let's you guys, most of you were just in a meditation, right? Before you came to this, or you were watching a meditation, sound meditation and dance meditation.
Yeah.
So when you were in that sort of space, did anything come up without effort, like for you mentally?
I didn't watch it, but I have meditated in the past. I'm on Central Time, so,
Yeah.
but yeah, but for me, like, though my creative process works, I can either frame it with like, okay, I want to do something, or sometimes I'll just kind of sit down on the piano and just not think about a creative process and let it come to me.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm able to summon it, I guess, on command, but also sometimes just without even thinking, my mind automatically, well, not sometimes, often it'll just automatically go towards hearing music
Mm-hmm.
without even intentionally wanting to necessarily.
Yeah.
And some on more like sometimes actually when I don't want to listen to music, it still comes to me just because that's part of my how my brain works is no matter what, it either is playing music that I've heard before or creating more sound. So
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's sort of like what I was touching on with the indigenous flute playing that I was hearing in my head and sort of seeing what comes up when you're allowing yourself to be alone with your thoughts and following those and trying to lean into that as part of your creative process and acknowledging that your creative process isn't just what is outside of you and external to you, it's also what's going on in your head and how you can sort of put yourself in a position mentally to facilitate that more easily. Uh, so I saw someone said they were thinking about their dad while listening to the meditation.
Perhaps I could share a little bit about my experience
Mm-hmm.
just in like the past hour.
Yeah.
Uh, I was introduced to this concept of like deep listening,
Mm-hmm.
and during the pandemic, I also, besides that, I kind of were interested into the concepts of mindfulness, and I took a mindfulness workshop because I was feeling very unproductive during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I think these all concepts kind of changed how I listen to the music. Like when during the meditation process, I don't think there was a lot of flow of ideas that would comes during the process, and I was like really focused in that sound. And I think this kind of meditation music or sounds really helps. It is especially effective in such a way, and I think, I don't know, perhaps like some whiles later something would suddenly come up, or perhaps it allows you to have like the head space for more creative ideas to come after you have that meditation experience.
Yeah, definitely.
can I add something to that?
Mm-hmm.
That just made, speaking of creativity, reminded me of something. But like with the creative process, like probably like a month ago, I created a metaphor, which is I consider like creative energy kind of like a river in the body, and meditation kind of helps clear the gunk out of that river, so it can flow more easily from what because just like stresses of daily life like kind of gunk up that river and make it like slow down, but meditation can help remove that gunk and make the river go faster again, so make you more creative.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely part of uh, part of the meditative practice that I work on for myself is related to my anxiety, and part of the metaphor that speaks to me is the idea of the river being when I'm meditating. If I'm trying to release thoughts, I'm envisioning myself in the river, and my thoughts are things floating by in the river, and things that I am trying to grasp onto will pull me down the river. But that's pulling me into like an anxious space. And I think that that's another way of looking at that. Whereas the goal of the meditation is to let the river flow freely past you and not to hold on to anything.
I really like what you. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut anyone off. I was just going to say I really like what you shared about sort of like being open to the being sort of, at least what came to my mind was like taken by the river. I I've always had a very strong, and I was raised by my mom, and she's a visual artist, and she used a lot of practices in her sort of creative process of like really trying to explore that more like intuitive sort of realm of creativity. And one of the things that I've always sort of, I at least try to do, and I feel like sometimes the work that makes me the happiest that I do, that comes out of it, comes from this sort of almost like a practice like like I read like that the surrealists sort of in the art movement, like even the writers, like they would try to tap into this like deep subconscious, like maybe they'll wake up in the middle of the night. I don't recommend people ruining their sleep schedules, by the way. But and they would just like write immediately what came out of their head, or they would just start speaking in almost like phonetics or tongues, and then like these words would form and these sentences would form and they wouldn't make sense, but you were just like, they were just pouring out these random thoughts and ideas and trying to just like let go of like the thought process. And then like after having like it sort of recorded in whatever way they did, whether they wrote it down or whatever, it would just go through and then like through that process like analyze it. And so through this process of just like opening up and like throwing that stuff out, or like just like letting go in the river, and then all this stuff comes out through the process of like self-analysis, they might come up with something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think that part of what I would like to pass on to everyone is that, in my experience, the meditative process isn't about just reaching this perfect state of clarity and being able to lay down or sit down and close your eyes and empty your mind immediately. It's meditation is the effort of doing that as well. It's the effort of separating yourself from your physical space. And in some instances, my meditation will immediately take me to like a different place entirely, where I'm to create a surrealistic sort of narrative in my mind of the sort of way that I'm trying to guide myself along. And in other instances, it's merely a struggle to sit with myself and empty my thoughts from my head and breathe. And that's just, it's important to recognize the value of practicing to get both experiences. So something I could suggest for the emptying, I've got a couple different techniques. One of them is using the metaphor of the river, and thinking of your thoughts as things that you've caught a hold of, visualizing them, and then recognizing that you're holding on to them and that you need to let go. And you can let go by bringing yourself back to your breath and listening to your breath. Another way of doing that is envisioning them like open tabs on your phone that you need to close because you have way too many open. And sort of envisioning closing extra things out that are just distracting you. And for me, it's become like I'll see like flashes of images and I'm just like clicking that X button over and over again in my head until my head is empty. And this is something that I use both for sleep and for meditation. So, let me see. So, talking a little bit about music, in terms of our experiences and what comes up if we're like choosing music for ourselves. And a lot of it is when we're being past our music selections or in what we're surrounding ourselves with, physically or otherwise. A lot of it is related to our subconscious feelings. So you may notice if you feel sad, you're more likely to choose sad music to listen to. And if you're happy or trying to induce a state of excitement or adrenaline, I personally mountain bike a fair amount, and so I'll listen to higher tempo music when I'm getting ready to do that, and it sort of puts me in this more process state for adrenaline. And it's sort of thinking, adding this intuitive layer into being aware of what your sensory experiences are doing to influence your mental state. And so I think a lot about that in terms of when I'm collaborating with an artist or creative, you know, what sort of surroundings are we in? What sort of situations are coming up, whether it's current events or what I know about their personal, help me inform the way that I'm going to interact with them, help me create proper boundaries for our interaction, so that I'm not taking on too much, but also helps me navigate and help them figure out what it is they're trying to surface. Have I'm sure all of you have music coaches and professors, but have any of you, how many of you work on creating music independently? Cool. So sweet. So how much, let me see. I guess I'm interested in hearing a little bit from you guys about how that uh, how that surfaces for you. Ah, is my video cutting in and out a little bit? Okay. Um, cool. So yeah, I guess I'm interested in hearing a little bit about your personal creative processes and anyone who's interested in talking about that and how it uh, arose out of what I'm assuming is a separate musical practice where you were introduced to music earlier in your life.
I guess I'll go since people aren't speaking. But so for me, like I said earlier, I always kind of heard music in my head. Um, like I have like a really bad issue of getting music stuck in my head in general. Like, so I joke around that I either always have music that someone else wrote in my head or my own music. But so that kind of helped. But normally my creative process is I do a lot of experimentation at the piano. Piano, like I'm better at playing clarinet than piano, but piano has always been where I just like um, I forgot his name, but it might have been. There's this book called like The Originals, and it's about the creative process. And one of the like elements of creativity that this writer wrote was play, and for me, that is a lot of how I get my creative process going. Because yeah, I can just sit on my computer and compose, but I don't even have to think about like specifically composing when I'm at a piano. So that's been the way I've always kind of expressed my creativity. Is just even if it's just improvisation and learning how the different chords work and stuff. It's
Mhm.
just basically using play as my element of creativity.
Mhm.
I think to me, it what really inspires is really sounds, and it could be from everywhere. Like I could like take this mug, and there is this spoon, and if you're like being very mindful, or like like you're paying attention to that sound, perhaps you could like figure out like how to hit that spoon into that cup, or like different positions, and it makes different sounds. And sometimes to me sounds or timbres come from that. And when I need to if I'm working on, like, I think that that would be a great idea for like an electronic piece, then I perhaps would try to record it and try to do something experiment, like do some experiments in a DAW or something, like a software or something. But if it's like for acoustics, then perhaps I would like take out my manuscript paper and try to. I need to work on papers. I cannot like work on Sibelius or notation software
Mm.
right right after I got my idea. So all of these like sketches, they would compile, and when you like see it visually, it also gives you more idea on how to do different variations or different versions of that idea, and it gradually grows. I think that is kind of my creative process. Yeah.
Thank you.
If you don't mind me jumping in really quick, I think definitely the writing things down on paper is the most important. I cannot process anything in front of a computer and try to be creative, but just if you have the freedom to write it down, you can really do anything. And for me, it's just kind of, you can see it, you're physically doing it, which makes it connect to you better.
Yeah, absolutely. I have the same sort of tendency with my own like story writing process, where there's a certain level of emotional disconnect from the writing if I begin on a computer than if I start by writing and putting pen to paper. And it's been shown through various things that physically writing something out only helps you remember it better than typing it. But also, the physical act has more to do with our brain function because you had to physically learn how to write. And you're not saying you didn't have to physically learn how to type, but the way in which you learn to write is going to be more deeply ingrained in your processes than typing is, because it's the act of creating the letters yourself and stringing the thoughts together in your own hand, as opposed to having everything pre-programmed on the keyboard, you know.
Yeah, and I think I really like using pencils. Like I love how this sounds on the paper, like when you're writing it. And it could be a form of meditation to me, like, just that sounds is very meditative to me.
Yeah.
On a different topic, I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but I feel that I'm most creative when I'm translating something non-musical into music. So whether that's, you know, taking a text or just like trying to create a mood, I feel like trying to make these associations with like two disparate ideas is what generally makes the most interesting product for me. I don't know how anybody else feels about that.
I feel very strongly. Sometimes, like, I think that can throw a wrench in that sort of cycle that we can sometimes get into, like, with sort of coming up with like similar content over and over again. I always like to, I'm currently in a phase where I'm always trying to introduce something novel to creatively challenge me. Like, and to go on about like what Alvin was saying with sounds and stuff, like a week or two ago, I was obsessively playing with like silverware on this like unput together bike, and just making and using like different things to hit it. I mean, like, you know, of course John Cage did a lot of stuff like that, but I mean, I think, and not that necessarily I have an idea to do a piece with it or anything like that, but just the creative process of just like playing with sound, I think is, it can be such a beautiful and rewarding experience, like without the pressure of having to necessarily make a, you know, good piece of this or that out of it, but just like exploring it and like allowing yourself to sort of be in that like childlike state. And, you know, like, of course there's fun. Oh, that's A chord or sharp. Oh, I wonder if I could play like a chord if I, you know, that's all fun too. But you know what I mean? It's just nice to play.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if anybody's read the book, The Creative Habit by Twyla Tharp, but she talks about a process where she has she's a choreographer, right? She's a dancer. And whenever she's doing a dance, she has like a box of stuff that she'll collect and all these items. And they have nothing to do with actual movement, but she basically is just a collection of ideas that will hopefully spark something, especially in association with each other. And I think all of that is an important part of the creative process, right? Not necessarily the things that relate directly to what we're doing musically, or in her case, you know, choreographically. That's an interesting word that I just made up. But just, you know, being able to explore the ideas that don't deal directly with our art.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel very strongly that most of my creative pursuits are influenced by non-writing things. And by and large, I spend the majority of my time either listening to music or researching philosophers which don't really necessarily play into writing sci-fi or fantasy novels so much. It's more mining ideas for just experimenting with new ways of saying things. Like there's only so many ways in compose yourself. Yeah. The artist way. Thank you. So I try to look at my philosophical pursuit, differing ideologies, and how I can influence others. Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. So as far as safety and vulnerability in the creative process, for me, one thing that I'm really focused on in helping other creatives is having taken the time in my life to figure out what would help, like, of getting to the point that I felt comfortable creating, and then recognizing what sort of needs I had met to get there. And a lot of it had to do with not just like financial stability, but all people I was surrounding myself with, how they supported me, whether or not they were able to support me, what behaviors I was putting out into the world, and what sort of uh, what sort of things I was trying to engage with in terms of and sort of bringing my values out of myself and letting go of things that weren't helping me, made it easier for me to become vulnerable. And I think that the importance of vulnerability is recognizing that it's where your most honest expression is going to come from. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely no reward without taking risks. Like this entire pursuit that I'm doing now for my career is exactly one of those risks, but it's also made at a calculated state from recognizing that I'm taking the risk because my values are pushing me in that direction.
Yeah, I just also wanted to chime in, like particularly for me when I think about safety, it's more in in lines of not necessarily regarding sort of risk taking. I mean, that to me is like it's very important for me too. I would sort of practice the whole I'd rather write something really bad by taking a risk than doing something that I feel like I didn't allow myself to be myself. But to me, like, totally the safety part comes into where like my composing environment, right? Like I know a lot of people who love to just go to different places and feel these different energies and environments to get a lot of their work done. And I'm like a total opposite. I need my nest. I need to feel like I am secure in my spot so I can go and deal with either whatever big problems that I'm having inside, my head, or just that to have that safe environment so I can go, I'm going to take this huge jump, this huge artistic jump. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people are different. I was just always, I think that for me, the environment is definitely important.
Yeah.
So do you feel that it's kind of like a hierarchy of needs thing where like before you can take the like cognitive risk, you need to have the feeling of like physical safety, physical for lack of a better descriptor in this case?
Oh, or if you're asking me, uh, physical, no, it's definitely emotional. I mean, it's not because like for me, like if I'm taking a risk by maybe exploring a subject matter that has to do with a type of trauma, that's difficult. That's really difficult. And and doing stuff like that and allowing yourself to be that vulnerable, that's an exhausting experience. It just like it's so, and I'll just go ahead and say it's so friggin' scary at times. I mean, scared the living crap out of me. Scary, like and I think that that environment, to take that risk or to take that jump and like I'm gonna, if it's just a small one of just like trying something new in the music, a new technique, new this, or if it's a bigger one that has to do with subject matter that involves personal trauma or something like that. Yeah, for me personally, you know, safety is important. I would never say that I'm the bravest person. I just hope that sometimes I can be courageous and do it. You know what I mean? Like, but yeah, the safety environment thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you coming up with the word emotional rather than physical, because I was like, physical is definitely not the right word. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I do think that it's entirely relevant to bring up like the hierarchy of needs in this context though, because I feel like we do have the base thing is to meet your physical needs, but then also having your emotional needs met as the next level above that, to put you in a space where you feel confident in challenging things to explore difficult terrain in your creativity. And I mean that in terms of like part of it can have to do with timing, like the timing for me of when my father died when I was 20, and then choosing to write about his alcohol abuse and redemption when I was 21 or 22, and incorporate those narratives into my own creative process, spoke to both things that I needed to resolve, but also the level at which I could actually express them was limited by my feelings of security or insecurity, and my how long and the distance I'd had to the matter or the subject matter. You know. And I think Austin, could you tell me a little bit more about like what it is like, if you're comfortable, like could you give us an example of that distance you're like the space you're looking at?
Sure. So if I could just clarify, like spaces and meaning like the distance when we were referring to that environment, or the time in dealing with like that subject matter, or like
Both, since you have put it on like what you're trying to explore is difficult, like on an emotional level, feeling safe and secure and doing so.
yeah. So like one that I am comfortable talking about would definitely be like my addiction does run on my father's side of the family. I've lost some family members to it, and I myself am actually three and a half years sober from an opiate addiction, which was, that there's a lot of stuff that comes with that. And like for me, like if I'm dealing with like really difficult stuff, or if I'm going down that sort of route where I'm starting to explore how I feel about certain issues regarding that, like it's just one thing that I'm like was so fortunate to have is like, my mom is still like, she's been like an unbelievable supporter of me. So like when I grew up, she sort of taught me these like coping skills in this way to have this sort of like safe environment in like the room, for example. Like one of my favorite things to do is like sometimes like just, okay, and you guys might like think that this is super weird, but I like to sometimes compose in the bathroom. I like to compose in an empty bathtub sometimes. Okay, I do, because I feel safe. I feel so safe to be able to sort of explore like some of the why did I use, like, and go back farther back into the harder childhood stuff. And I guess like for me, like when it comes to that distance and stuff, I mean, the first thing is like never force it. Like don't do it if you're not ready. Like I feel like that's so big. There are certain things like I'm like, well, if I don't write about it, that's okay for me, because like I need to do what's best for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that the first thing is like, is to just don't force it, and just that safe space and supportive environment. And being able to let go, like you were mentioning earlier, for if you decide to put a piece of art out there that might have to involve that sort of subject matter and make you vulnerable to other people's criticisms, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I think that there's an important thing in that. I'd like to address the range. I'm going to use your example of composing in the bathtub to stretch across to composing in like a noisy environment. But I want to address timing, I think, and understanding your mental state and why you feel you can or cannot create something, and if you choose to do so, why you're choosing to do so. Because I can say from past experience, um, writing on that difficult subject matter at the time was important to me as like a statement of my own vitality, to deny the expectations of or limitations I was feeling around my own ability to achieve, having lost this pretty integral part of my family. But I also think, to jump on to the next part, that it's going to be really dependent on you personally, what kind of spaces you're going to be comfortable creating in. And I think there's so many layers to that. It's going to be how you were socialized, what your understanding or relationship to authority and non-authority is, what sort of things were permitted by your upbringing, your natural inclination to be more introverted or extroverted, just how you're feeling in the moment. Like sometimes it's easier to be like, if you're in a good mood, sometimes it's easier to be extroverted than if you're naturally introverted. Sometimes it's easier to be extroverted if you're in a good mood, and sometimes it's harder. And it's just going to be dependent on you as well as your relationship to the people you're creating around, if you're choosing to do that in a more public setting. And I think intuitively, if you're feeling good about the space, you're going to know whether or not you're comfortable creating in a space, based on how you feel about it, but you have to listen to that. I don't want to run over, but did anyone, I believe Justin was the one that brought up working in a louder environment or a noisy environment. I didn't know if anyone wanted to put in final word on that. No? Okay. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate talking with you today. It was a great opportunity. Really love the conversation, the discussion, and feedback. Hope you guys got something out of it. And thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your discoveries and your exploration on that. It's interesting. As a friend of mine, Matt is a friend of mine, and we don't live far from each other, so we often talk a lot about these things, and I'm really glad to see he's pursuing this path finally on helping other creatives find their creativity. You know, so maybe he'll be around next year, and you guys can actually have a face-to-face with him. All right. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Yeah, of course, Karen, that's fine. And enjoy the rest of your Sunday and get a break before we get back on our computers tomorrow. Thanks again, Julia, for the beautiful movement. All right.
Thank you for those of you that tuned in. I was really grateful to be here. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah, you're welcome. See
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
See you guys.